All right, well, now that we have the data source view and the tables or the views from the source that we want to use to create the cube, now we're going to build the definition of the cube. Now, coming back here to the drawing that I was putting together, we still don't have anything in this SSAS project other than just the connection to the data source and the list of views. Well, we're going to get one step further here by creating the definition of the cube and the dimensions. So I will right-click in Solution Explorer on the cube folder here in Solution Explorer and create a new cube. And I get the Welcome to the Cube wizard, and I'll take Next. And it asks how we want to create the cube. Well, we're going to create it from existing tables or existing views. This is the most popular way to create cubes. So I'll take Next. And then it asks what tables or what views from the source or from our data source view represent the fact tables or the measure groups, if you will. Now it has the two fact tables listed here along with the 6 dimensions. Now I could check the checkbox for BDBI Fact Internet Sales and BDBI Fact Reseller Sales to tell it what tables represent the fact tables or the measure groups. Again, measure group and fact table are interchangeable. There's also a Suggest button. I'm going to click the Suggest button, and it goes out and figures that BDBI Fact Internet Sales and BDBI Fact Reseller Sales are the fact tables. Now, it's not because it had the word fact in the name. It's because it saw the primary key foreign key relationships, and it saw that there were some measures that it could possibly aggregate. Now, you always want to take a look at what this selects, because once in a while, as we'll see in more complicated examples, this will mistake a dimension for a fact table. It's not that common that it'll miss a fact table, but sometimes it will misidentify a dimension as a fact table. And in that case, we want to uncheck it. But it got everything right here. So I'll take Next. And this tells me for the two fact tables what it's going to construct. Now we've got fact internet sales and fact reseller sales here. Now I'm actually going to do something. For the end user, when they see internet sales and reseller sales, if they see those words, that's probably enough for them. The VW fact, that was necessary as a naming convention when we were building the views. But for the end user, internet sales and reseller sales would be sufficient. So we could actually click inside of here and change this to just plain internet sales and just plain reseller sales. It's not required, but you know, a nice short sweet name is perfect for end users. Now the other thing that we're going to do here, notice how in internet sales it has the core measures: total product cost, sales amount, tax amount, and freight. It also repeats them down here for the reseller sales. Now it can't use the same name. We can't have the word total product cost twice across fact tables. Now what it does, it takes a very verbose approach. It actually lists the fact table at the end here. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply put the word reseller at the beginning of each one of these. So I'll call this reseller total product cost and get rid of the VW business out here at the end. And call the sales amount reseller sales amount. Same thing for tax amount. Just put the prefix reseller in front of it. Same thing for the freight. So I've got nice clean names here. Now someone might say, well, up here you're just simply calling it sales amount, and here you're calling it reseller sales amount. Well, to be consistent, we can also at the top here for each one of these call this internet total product cost, internet sales amount. So again, these are naming conventions, and naming conventions are subjective, but you want to have one nice, clean, consistent naming convention here. So I've got a nice, clean set of names. Now notice how it also added another measure in here for the tally. This is the number of rows or the number of instances when we start slicing this across dimensions. So if we want to know the number of products that were sold on a particular day, we could actually use the counts here. Now I'll I'll call this just plain internet sales count, and I'll call this reseller sales count. So that's a courtesy measure that that Analysis Services is adding. So I've got two clean fact tables here. I'll take next. Well, then it lists the dimensions that it's going to create. It's going to create VWDIM customer, VWDIM date, VWDIM product, VWDIM promotion, and VWDIM reseller. Well, once again, we use those as conventions in our views. I can shorten the names for the top levels for each one and call it just plain customer and just plain date. And again, I'm renaming the top level here because the word dim probably isn't going to mean much to an end user. Now, some people might name it still with the dim prefix, others might not. Again, we're talking about naming conventions. So again, for each of the outer levels here, I'm getting rid of the VWDIM so that our outer levels are just simply referred to as customer, date, product, promotion, and reseller. Now notice how underneath customer there's a tie to the related dimension for geography, and the same thing here for the reseller. That's because again this was a child dimension or a reference dimension off of the customer and the reseller. Now you might be asking a question here at this point, and that is, why isn't geography listed as an outer dimension? If I go back to my slide deck, we want to be able to look at internet sales or reseller sales by geography. Well, right now geography isn't listed here. It was underneath customer and reseller, but it's not its own outer dimension. That's because the wizard didn't spot it. We're going to have to add that in manually. So we'll take next, and we'll call the cube. Now the cube by default is going to be the same name. I'm going to call the cube the same name as the project. I'll call it Mini ADW 2008 OLAP. So that'll be the name of the cube inside of the OLAP database. I'll take finish. Now notice what happened in Solution Explorer. First of all, I'm going to close anything that opened up in the designer. I'll go back into it in a minute. So I'll click the window drop down at the top and take close all documents. Well, notice what we've got here in Solution Explorer. We've got a cube and we've got 5 dimensions. We still don't have geography yet. Well, do we now have some kind of a browsable database so we could go into Excel and do this? Not yet. What we've done, we're one step further here. So what we've done at this point is, after running the wizard, we have the definition of a cube, but not a physical OLAP database and cube yet. I'm always running out of room when I type here. So that's what we've got at this point. We have a definition of a cube, but not a physical OLAP database yet. Well, what do we have to do to get that? Well, a little bit of work we still have to do before we can actually have an OLAP cube. What about that 6th dimension for geography? What do we have to do to get that here? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the cube wizard, or excuse me, open up the cube editor. So I'm going to double click on the definition of the cube that was created. Now there are a lot of tabs up here that we're eventually going to get to as we get through the full-blown Analysis Services learning curve. We've got tabs up here for things like calculations, KPIs, drill-through actions, partitions, aggregations. We'll get to those another day. I'm going to go to the tab for the dimension usage. This is the central nervous system. This is probably the most important screen in all the cube editor. This actually derived from the data source views that we created and where we built the relationships. And notice how it picked up that product and promotion were tied directly to both fact tables through the product and the promotion key. That internet sales was tied to customer through the customer key, but there's a gap here because reseller sales is not sliceable by customer. and internet sales is not sliceable by reseller. But we don't have geography. And as we saw here in the final result, we had geography in the list, but it was through the 2 dimensions. All right, well, at this point you would think, okay, I can right-click here and add geography in manually because the Cube Wizard didn't see it. Well, I can try. Unfortunately, I only have the 5 dimensions that I already know that I had. What do I have to do to get geography in here? Well, we have to take a step backwards. It turns out we can't do it in the dimension usage just yet. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer, and I'm going to go to the dimension menu here. I'm going to right-click on dimensions, and I have to add the geography in here manually. Once again, the reason that it didn't get picked up by the wizard is because it was sort of, let me come back to my slide deck here. The geography dimension was sort of out of sight of the wizard. The wizard is great at picking up star schema relationships where we have direct denormalized relationships. It's not terribly good at picking up reference relationships like this, so we have to add it in manually. So I'm going to right click on dimensions and I'm going to add a new dimension manually. So I get welcome to the dimension wizard, and I'll take next. And I'm going to add it from an existing table, so I'll take next. And the table I want to use is VW dim geography. So it's available as from the views, which didn't have it in the dimension list, but I'm going to have to change that. Now it picks up that the key is the geography key. Well, I'll take next. And then it asks what columns we want the user to be able to browse. Well, we want to let the user browse the city, the state province name, the country, and the postal code. However, what we don't want to do is let the user browse the geography key. The geography key is an identity column. It's a surrogate key. It has no meaning whatsoever to an end user, or it shouldn't have any meaning to an end user. So while it'll be an available attribute, we don't want to let somebody browse it here. Now, notice how we get a warning here that says or actually doesn't let us do it. It says the key attribute, geography key, must be enabled for browsing. Well, once again, we don't want to let somebody look at this. Well, as it turns out, we can't do it here. We can do it. We can make the geography key such that it's used behind the scenes, but the user can't browse it. We just can't do it here. So I'll just have to keep that on. I'll take next. Now this is going to create a dimension called VW dim geography. Once again, I'm going to change this to just plain geography and take finish. Well, that established a geography dimension. Now it also opened up a dimension editor. Now we're actually going to have to go through this for the other dimensions, but since I'm already in here, I'm going to do a little bit of doctoring here. This is where we customize dimensions. Now there's a lot of properties that we can set here, only 1 or 2 of which we're going to do right now. Once again, I don't want the user to be able to see this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this geography key, go to properties. Now in this long list of properties, I'm going to go up to the top alphabetically. There's a property called attribute hierarchy visible. And that means is that visible to client applications. We don't want the geography key visible to client applications, so I'm going to set that attribute hierarchy visible to false. And then I'm going to save this. So that's the only thing I'm going to do for this geography dimension right now, is I set the attribute hierarchy visible property for the geography key to false. I'll save this dimension and close it. Once again, we're building local definitions. We don't have a deployed OLAP database yet. I'll come up to the cube editor here in Solution Explorer. I went back to the cube editor, and I'm going to go to the dimension usage. Now that geography dimension doesn't show here, but now if I right click and say add cube dimension, now geography shows up. It didn't show up a minute ago, but now it did because we added the geography dimension manually. I'll take OK. Well, that adds the geography as an available dimension, but it doesn't pick up the relationship here. We have to help it along. We are going to do the equivalent of a visual join. So if you draw an analogy between this and what you'd have with a relational database, where we'd have to join internet sales and geography through the reseller, watch what we're going to do here. I'm going to click the ellipsis button where internet sales intersects with geography. And I'm going to click the relationship type drop down and make it a referenced relationship. So we want to look at internet sales by geography, but we have to do it through the customer dimension, through the customer dimension. So the intermediate dimension here is going to be customer. Now the reference dimension attribute is going to be the geography key. The intermediate is going to be the same name, the geography key. If this were really smart, it could actually figure that out for us, but it doesn't. Now there's a checkbox here called materialize. This is an optimization feature that will add a little bit of additional information to the cube under the hood to make the internal aggregations of internet sales by geography as fast as possible. So I'd create a reference relationship through the customer dimension using the geography key that was common in both tables. I'll take OK, and now we see we have a reference relationship. So internet sales is now sliceable by geography. Well, I'll do the same thing for reseller sales and geography. I'll click the ellipsis button. I will change the relationship type to referenced. The intermediate dimension will be reseller, and the key that's common between the two is the geography key. Same concept. And then I'll take OK. Well, now we have something that pretty much matches what we had in the slide deck. Now also notice that the wizard, when we ran a little while ago, picked up the role-playing dimensions. We now can look at internet sales and reseller sales by order date, by due date, and by ship date. Now each time the dimension primary key that's being used is the date key, but if I click on where internet sales intersects with the due date, it's using the due date column in fact internet sales. And if I go over to reseller sales and take a look at it by ship date, it's tying the date key to the ship date. So there's our role-playing dimension. So Analysis Services actually builds 3 views of that date dimension. If you're wondering, is it making 3 copies of the date dimension? No, definitely not. There's only one date dimension here in the list of dimensions. It's simply defining it 3 different ways. So there are 3 different logical views of that physical dimension. I'll save this. And we are about ready to deploy this to look at the data. But there's one thing that I've got to do. If I actually take a look at the sales data, right now I'm going to get raw numbers. They're not going to be formatted. I want those measures to be formatted as currency. This is a little bit trickier just from a navigation standpoint than what it should be. I'm going to come over to the Cube Structure tab. Now, if I expand internet sales and reseller sales in the definition for the 2 measure groups, I see the measures. What I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to click on everything from total product cost down to freight and do a shift click. Unfortunately, there's no multi-select here. I want to set a format property to format these as currency. There's no way to do a shift click. Well, here's what you do. This is a little strange. Up in the drop down, up in the toolbar, there's an option to change this from a tree view to a grid view. So I'm going to click the drop down in this toolbar that right now says Show Measures Grid. I'm going to actually show it as a grid. Well, what I can do now is I can do a shift click on the first 4 here that have a data type of double, and then do a control click on the other 4 so that I have all 8 selected that I want to format as currency. With those selected, I can now right-click, go to the property option, and I'm going to set the format string to currency. So I have to go into the grid view to do it. I couldn't do it in the tree view. Why that is, don't have a clue. Now also notice that there are a couple of other properties in here. One of the key ones is the aggregate function. By default, this is a fully additive fact table, which means that the measures are going to be summed when we slice it by any related dimension. I'll come back and talk about this after we deploy this. Alright, I will save this. Well, we are now ready to at least look at the data by geography. But as I said, we don't yet have an actual database. We have the definition of one. What we have to do, if we want to actually have a database, we have to take an option in Solution Explorer to actually process this. Now notice how there's a process and a deploy option. Talk about them later. But there's an option to process. Now remember that impersonation account I talked about earlier, that anytime Analysis Services builds this database, builds this OLAP cube, it's going to read from whatever's the impersonation account. And we told it, back up in the data source, to use the service account. Now something that might happen on some people's virtual machines, if this process winds up working fine, then you're okay. If it doesn't work fine, if you get a bunch of error messages, it might be because you've got to change the service account. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to close all the windows. I'm going to click the window drop down and take close all documents. And I will right click on the top of this project in Solution Explorer and take the option to process. Now I might get several messages saying, do you want to build and deploy? Do you want to run, etc., etc. I want to take the option to continue or to confirm or to say yes or whatever will get me to the next step. Well, this says the server content is out of date. What it's actually saying is, hey, I don't see anything out there in the server. So a build and a deploy has to be done before it can be processed. So I'll say yes to that. And that finishes the deploy, and now it's going to actually do the process. So I'll take the option to run. Here is where Analysis Services is actually, I'll come back to my diagram here, actually reading from the relational database and building the OLAP database. It is physically making a copy, but it's a very different type of copy. This OLAP database is as different as could be. So if I actually take a look at what it did here as it went through the process, and the process ran very quickly. If I expand internet sales, look what it did. It's actually firing select statements back to the original database based upon the view to take the data from the relational database and synthesize it into a summarized cube. So it's firing off select statements for all of the dimensions and all of the fact tables. So it's actually doing that under the hood. Also want to bring up something else, something will become a little apparent later. I'm going to expand where it processed the geography dimension. Even though that was in itself, we had cities and countries and postal codes, it actually does the equivalent of a select distinct to determine the number of individual countries and postal codes and state provinces that they're going to be browsable. So it's actually building some internal bitmap indexes that are tied to distinct list of those attributes that the user can use to slice data on. Now, if for some reason this bombed on you, if you got a bunch of authentication errors, what you might have to do is you might have to go to your configuration manager. You might need to go, and you can find the SQL Server Configuration Manager sometimes by going to All Programs, and then SQL Server 2008 R2, and then Configuration Tools, and then SQL Server Configuration Manager. Usually it shows up under there. Now, I actually have it on my desktop. So what I'm going to do here is I'll come back to my desktop, and I'll launch where you would see what service account is being used. This is only if you got an error actually running it, actually trying to process it. So I'm launching the configuration manager, and it's going to list the different services that are running on the machine. Well, again, if you got an error trying to process the cube, what you might need to do is come down to the service for analysis services, right-click on it, go to properties, and change the logon account to, say, use this account, and then put in your domain name. Now, for most students, it's going to be sfdomain, then a backslash, and then first name dot last name. Because I'm an instructor, we just use first initial last name. So mine is sfdomain backslash kgoff. For students, it is probably going to be sfdomain backslash first name dot last name. Then your password to get in your VM, which you have to put in twice, and then take apply. Now, you'll also need to restart the service because it's got to log in under the new name. So that might be necessary if the built-in service account wasn't strong enough to access the database in order to process the cube. So again, if you got process errors, you might need to go in that configuration manager and actually go to analysis services, right-click, go to properties, and set the logon as account to your domain name. Now, in practice, in a normal production environment, you would not use a person's name. There'd be some dummy domain name that you would use. Here on our VMs, we're just using our domain name. All right, well, that takes care of this video. In the next video, we're actually going to take a look at looking at the output of what we just processed.